of January right now, when a million Americans are testing positive for COVID a day, roughly. Why is the president taking these steps now? Why didn't he take these 3 months ago?
Well, let me first say that what we've been working to implement is building on the steps we've taken over the last 6 months and more. Remember, when the president took office, there were 0 or 1 approved testing, at-home testing option on the market. Now there are 9. We needed to expand the market capacity. The president used the Defense Production Act, $3 billion invested to expand that market. The reason he was able to announce the purchase of, or the plan to purchase an additional $500 million beyond the $500 million we'd already announced is because of the expansion of the market. And just since last summer, leading up to December, we had quadrupled the size of the market. So if you look at the comparison, right now we're doing almost 12 million tests a day in this country. We were doing under 2 million tests a day a year ago. There's about 300 million tests. The rules of the Senate up against anyone's. Democrat, Republican, anyone serving today and before then. But his view is that there are times in history, now is one of them, where you can't allow the protection of process to get in the way of protecting people's fundamental rights. That is also an argument that he made today to the caucus.
What happens now with the legislation?
Well, Leader Schumer has obviously conveyed what his plan and his path forward is, and I think members are going to have an opportunity to vote and decide and determine what side of history they want to be on. Go ahead.
Thanks, Jen. Did Senator Sinema's remarks on the floor today come as a surprise to President Biden, or had she conveyed them in private to the president or to the White House?
I'm not going to get into private conversations with any senator, including Senator Sinema.
Can you tell us the last time they spoke?
I'm not going to get into more details about private conversations.
Okay. During his first press conference last March, the president was asked if there was anything he could do to protect voting rights outside of passing legislation. At the time, he said yes, but I don't want to reveal my strategy. Now, can you tell us whether the White House has identified any more executive actions that the president can and plans to take?
Well, first I would say the president did sign a historic executive order early on in his presidency. Also, since that period of time, I believe the Department of Justice has doubled their funding and support for protection of voting rights in states. Obviously, he has spoken about this issue very vocally in recent months, since that period of time, multiple times as well. The vice president has been leading this effort to gather support across the country, and we're of course going to continue to look for ways to protect people's fundamental rights. The next step is of course these votes in the Senate.
I have a question about a video that Iran's supreme leader posted on his website that appears to show a robot conducting a drone strike, killing the former president at his Mar-a-Lago golf club. Is the intelligence community assessing this threat and working with former President Trump to offer protection of any kind?
I'm not going to speak to the work of our intelligence community. Obviously, the kind of rhetoric or video from the Supreme Leader is something that we've seen, offensive rhetoric and behavior in the past. But I'm not going to speak to more specifics of internal discussions.
But are you aware of the video?
I don't have any more details on it.
Okay. And then one more for a colleague who's not here. The embassy in Baghdad, the U.S. embassy just tweeted about an attack that happened there. Do you have any details or any response?
I don't. This may have just recently happened. I don't have any more details, but we can venture to get you something after the briefing.
Thanks, Jen.
Back on the Supreme Court's decision, more than 80 million people would have been affected by this vaccine and testing mandate. So what kind of impact does this decision have on the broader effort just to get COVID under control?
Well, I think we're already looking at this point in time of more than 71% of people have had both shots that to make them fully protected. Obviously, we're encouraging people, of course, to get boosted. More than 80%, 83%, I believe at this point, have had their first shot. We're going to continue to work full speed at doing that. Obviously, this was a step that we announced and we had every intention of implementing because we knew that it was the point where putting in place requirements in the workplace would help get more people vaccinated. The good news is that a number of companies have already decided to do that and do that successfully. And the work and the effort is really going to be on their shoulders. So really it's going to depend on how effective that is.
And your message to employees and workers who may see this decision and be concerned about what comes next for them?
Our message is that we're going to continue to work with employers across the country and continue to convey very clearly what the benefit of vaccine or testing requirements would be on workplaces, both as many companies struggle to fill their workplaces, struggle to bring people back to the workplace, people who are concerned about their safety, that this is an effective measure, and there are many models across the country to implement it.
Go ahead. Thanks, Jen. Should we expect the administration to try to issue a more targeted mandate following the Supreme Court ruling today?
I don't have any additional predictions of next steps here.
Are you going to try this again, or are you accepting what the Supreme Court decided?
Again, they just decided any legal action, I'd obviously defer to the Department of Justice, but at this point in time, what we are encouraging private sector companies to do is to take steps that have effectively worked around the country, that the vast majority of employers have indicated they have the intention to do.
Okay, and when it comes to the lunch that happened today, Senator Sinema, before the president got up there, reiterated that she does not want to change the 60 vote threshold. Senator Manchin just said now in a statement that he does not want to change that. Has the president accepted that he cannot sway them when it comes to changing the filibuster and creating an exception?
I think we're going to keep fighting till the votes are had.
But they have said today that they are not changing their positions, despite an appeal directly from the president.
And the president spoke to this after. Look, his job is to take on tough challenges, to speak out for what's right. And he thinks making changes to the rules in order to get voting rights passed and protect people's fundamental rights is right. We'll leave it to Leader Schumer on what the next steps are and what the process is from here. But we are going to keep having meetings, keep having calls, and that will be what the president's focus will be.
What was his response to seeing Senator Sinema come out just a few minutes before he got up there, which she knew what he was coming to talk about, and say that she did not support it?
I think the president was most focused on speaking directly to the caucus, not on her comments. Go ahead.
So what is the president's, I guess the administration's backup plan when it comes to voting rights and getting legislation passed? Is there a backup plan?
As you heard the president say when he came out of the caucus meeting, we're going to keep at it. We're going to stay at it. The president's...
Well, what does that mean, I guess, is what people would
That
like
means,
to know.
Caitlin, that any piece of legislation that's ever passed, that's hard, that's difficult, goes through some ups and downs and goes through some challenges. That doesn't mean you give up. That's not what leadership is. Leadership is continuing to fight for what's right, continuing to fight to get something done. That means sometimes it fails. We don't know what will happen next. That means sometimes there are gaps between when you get to move forward. We're going to have to determine what the next steps are. But in the meantime, the president is going to continue to make calls. He's going to continue to engage with his colleagues, and that's where his focus is on at this point in time. Go ahead.
Thank you. I had a couple specific ones, but I wanted to kind of follow on that. As you're determining next steps, I mean, frankly, things just seem like they're going pretty poorly right now for the White House. Build Back Better is being blocked, voting rights is being blocked, diplomatic talks with Russia doesn't seem to have brought us back from the brink of war, inflation's at a 40-year high, the virus is setting records for infection. So as we kind of hit this one-year period and a period where everything seems like it's in pretty rough shape, or nearly everything, which is not an invitation, I guess, to list off some other things. I'm wondering at what point do you take stock and say that things need to change internally, whether it's your outreach toward the Hill, whether it's the leadership within the White House. You seem to be stymied on an incredible number of fronts right now.
Well, let me give you a little bit of a different take on this. More than 200 million people are vaccinated. We've had a record job growth, record low unemployment rates historically in this country over the last year. We've rebuilt our alliances and our relationships around the world. And right now, as it relates to Russia, as you heard our National Security Advisor convey, we're working with partners around the world to convey very clearly. It's up to them to make a choice about what's next. We're not going to make that on their behalf. It's up to them to determine if there are going to be crippling economic sanctions or not, or if they decide to move forward. But we also recognize when you have a small margin and threshold in the Senate, it's very difficult to get things done and to get legislation passed. And the fact that the president, under his leadership, got the American Rescue Plan passed, a bipartisan infrastructure bill with 19 votes in the Senate, about 6 votes in the House, the fact that we are still continuing to work with members to determine the path forward on Build Back Better, that we have the vast majority of Democrats in the Senate supporting voting rights, that's a path forward for us. And our effort is to do hard things, try hard things, and keep at it. So we just don't see it through the same prism.
So the sense is things are going well, there's no need for change right now.
I think that having worked in a White House before, you do hard things in White Houses. You have every challenge at your feet, laid at your feet, whether it's global or domestically. And we could certainly propose legislation to see if people support bunny rabbits and ice cream, but that wouldn't be very rewarding to the American people. So the president's view is we're going to keep pushing for hard things, and we're going to keep pushing the boulders up the hill to get it done.
Two quick things. The president announced the distribution of high-quality masks earlier today. That's been kind of a vague and undefined phrase. I understand well-fitting, like what that literally means,
Yeah.
but in terms of the masks that you're trying to procure, do you have a sense of the N95s, KN95s in that universe, or is that just we're not quite there in the process?
We'll have more, I expect, in the coming days on that. And but right now, just so people understand the backstory here, the history, I should say, is we've distributed more than 30 million masks to food banks and community health centers. States have been doing that as well. We have a stockpile of 700 million high-quality masks in the government, and they are also widely available across the country. So what we're talking about here is making high-quality masks, as you know, available to the American people for free. There are a lot of ranges of high-quality masks. I think we'll have more details on that, on what that looks like next week.
And then I know you're limited a little bit about what you can say about politics from the podium, but the RNC said today that they would ask their candidates not to participate in debates held by the commission that has done it for the last few decades. Do you or the president have any reaction to that move by the RNC?
Well, the president has participated in many debates over the course of his career and believes they play a role in allowing the American people to hear from candidates and where they stand. So I think it's more a question best posed to the RNC on what they're so afraid of.
Would he participate in a debate that was planning to run for re-election, at least he said, and would he participate in a debate outside of the commission?
I would point you to the DNC for that and any more specifics. Go ahead.
The president, when he spoke to reporters after the Senate lunch today, he spoke about the voting rights push in the past tense. He said, "We missed this time." What then is the political value in moving forward with these show votes, given that the president effectively has acknowledged that this process has ended and risks potentially shining a light on Democratic divisions?
Well, I think you all can count who's for and against each vote, whether it's changes to the Senate rules or supporting these voting bills themselves. And I think it's very people publicly know where senators stand at this point in time. We will leave it to, and we'll work in lockstep with him, Leader Schumer, to determine what the next steps are here. And I know he's spoken a bit to that. But ultimately, this is about continuing to press to move forward on the protection of voting rights and to use it as a moment to elevate this issue as an important issue for people across the country. And of course, any senator is going to be put in the position of determining what side of history they're going to stand on. And that's, I guess, the purpose of a vote.
The president also spoke about voter subversion when he spoke to reporters.
Yeah.
But neither the Freedom to Vote Act nor the John Lewis Voting Rights Act deal with subversion. They're focused more on suppression. Would the president want to see Democrats, if this process does move forward in the future, address laws in these 19 states, some of which would potentially allow for the overturning of a free and fair election?
Well, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, actually in Section 112, actually makes it illegal for state officials to willfully fail or refuse to certify the aggregate tabulations of votes or certify the election of the candidates receiving sufficient such votes to be elected to office. That is obviously addressing a root problem we're seeing in laws in many states across the country. And what these laws are meant to do is provide some fundamental baselines for protections for voters, and that's an important part of doing it. Obviously, there's more you will continue to build from there, but that's an important component, I think, that sometimes everyone isn't always aware of in the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. Oh, go ahead.
But one unrelated question about the U.S. Postal Service. Yesterday, the Board of Governors elected a new chairman, someone who has expressed support for Postmaster General Louis DeJoy, who, as you know, has had a very controversial tenure. What's the White House position on the persistent delivery delays that the Postal Service seems to be experiencing, at least anecdotally, and DeJoy's current place as Postmaster General? Does he deserve to have that role?
You know I love anecdotal data. I will tell you that going back to the holidays, 97 or 98% of packages from the Postal Service were delivered on time. So there may be anecdotes from that 1 or 2%, but that's actual data.
The delays region by region.
Okay, but 98% across the country. We have expressed concerns in the past about DeJoy's leadership. DeJoy. That was a little slip there. DeJoy's leadership in the past, that has not changed. I will say, though, and I know this has been raised, so I'm just going to use this as an opportunity to address it, that many members of the Postal Service, including leadership, has expressed confidence and an interest in playing the role in delivering tests to people across the country, and their confidence in doing exactly that. So we take them at their word, and certainly we're encouraged by the data we saw from December. Go ahead, April. Oh, April, let me first say, 25 years covering the White House. That's pretty significant. I don't have a song for this, but just congratulations. I mean, I'm a terrible singer, so we don't want that anyway. Go ahead.
You could give me an interview with the president, but doesn't hold up. On the record, right. On another issue, Jen, the issue of policing. As you're working on voting rights, we understand simultaneously you're working diligently on this executive order to bring more teeth into protections for people, Americans, particularly minorities who are dying at the hands of bad policing. What is different with this executive order versus what could have happened on Capitol Hill? We understand laws have more teeth, but I understand that you guys are working to bring more teeth into these executive orders. Talk to me about that.
It's a great question, April, and as you know from covering this closely, we were kind of waiting on any executive orders out of deference to the negotiations that were happening in a bipartisan manner. And of course, we believe that the ability, especially in a bipartisan way, when possible, to move forward on legislation makes it permanent, right? And that is not the case, of course, with executive orders. In terms of the specific details, they are under discussion. I just don't have anything I can outline for you at this moment because there's an internal policy discussion.
So I understand there's a sense of urgency on it. I was told from one source it was days, and then others said it could be weeks, but it's happening soon. Why the sense of urgency right now, especially when you're dealing with voting rights, trying to figure that out as well?
You know, I think there's a recognition and a commitment by the president to deliver on what he promised. And of course, we were very supportive of the efforts to negotiate police reform on a bipartisan level. Obviously, that didn't move forward as we would have hoped. And so there's a legal policy substantive process that has to go through in the consideration of executive orders. That's ongoing. It is hard to predict the timing of that, so I don't want to do that from here. But it's a reflection of the president's commitment to delivering on his promise.
And last question: when candidate or president-elect, I guess you would say, Joe Biden was building his cabinet, he specifically singled out Marcia Fudge for her work and the fact that she was one of the presidents of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated that is having its Founders Day. He talked about the great work that the sorority does. What does he have for the Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated today as they're celebrating Founders Day, since he knows about them so well?
Of course. Well, the president wishes the women of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated a happy 109th Founders Day and many more years of academic excellence and service to those who are members. The president has been very vocal of his support, as you noted, April, for Delta Sigma Theta and all Divine Nine sororities and fraternities. In October, Vice President Harris hosted a historic meeting of the Divine Nine Council of Presidents at the White House, which included immediate past President Beverly Smith, and we're incredibly grateful to the work Delta Sigma Theta has done to uplift communities across the world, especially the hard work of former National President and current HUD Secretary Marcia Fudge, and the women of Delta Sigma Theta who work on behalf of the American people in the Biden-Harris administration each and every day, of which I hear there are a few. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. Also a one-year kind of question.
Sure.
When you listen to the president's inauguration address, you hear the words unity, you hear better angels of America. We didn't hear these words in his speeches at the Capitol or in Georgia. Does it mean that he has changed his state of mind, and does he think that America can't be unified anymore?
No, actually quite the contrary. I mean, the president believes that protecting people's fundamental rights to vote and participate in the process, whether you're a Democrat, a Republican, an independent, whatever party you are a member of, that is not a partisan issue. It should be a unifying issue. And that is why he reflected when he went to the caucus today on the fact that there are 16 Republicans who have supported voting rights in the past, because it is not been historically a partisan issue. And he's not prejudging who people support. He is trying to protect people's ability to participate in the process.
Maybe just a follow-up, if I may. With the Congress as it is, with the Supreme Court as it is, what's the way forward for the rest of the mandate? Is it more executive orders? Is it smaller steps rather than big transformative reforms? What's the idea?
Well, that's a big question, but I would say that. The president has had, we feel we've had a lot of success over the past year, getting the economy back on stronger footing, getting 200 million Americans vaccinated, getting a bipartisan infrastructure bill passed, rebuilding our relationships in the world and America's standing in the world. And what we want to do now is build on that in year 2. That means continuing to press to get voting rights done, to get Build Back Better done. To get CHIPS funding passed so we can ensure that manufacturing happens in the United States. So of course there are still big, bold pieces of the president's agenda he wants to get done, and he's going to keep fighting for it. It is also true that it is challenging to move things forward with such a small margin in Congress, and he is very well aware of that. We've been living it for almost a year now. Go ahead.
Jen, a testing question that a couple from cool colleagues who
Sure.
be here. The president mentioned the other 500 million tests that
Yep.
are now in the works. Can you give us any sense on timeline when you're looking at contracts, when you're looking at delivery, when people will actually end up seeing them after they see this first $500 million?
Sure. So I had said earlier this week that we were looking to finalize our contracts for the first $500 million within the 2 weeks. I can give you an update that now we're at the point where we've procured about 380 million of those tests, and we're going to continue to build from there. So the plan is to, we feel we're making very strong progress, of course, and after we conclude this phase, we'll begin awarding contracts for today's announcement. We'll continue to proceed from there.
So can you give a rough ballpark on when that second $500 million might?
Not yet. We may be able to as we kind of proceed in the process, as we have done with the first 500 million, but I don't have a specific update yet at this point in time, just a status update on the first 500 million, and obviously when we conclude this phase, we'll move to the next 500 million.
You had mentioned earlier in the briefing that less than 10% of the population is now having trouble finding a test. Can you kind of...
Said there was a recent poll. I'm happy to tweet it after the briefing if you'd like, to make it available to all of you. I think it was a YouGov poll.
We still see, we know how much you love anecdotal data, but people talking about the long waits, people talking about CVS, et cetera, et cetera. The president made it a point to say testing has gotten so much better today, but that would be pretty stark if it's now 1 in 10 Americans claiming that they're out.
Well, I said a recent poll, which I think is just important to note, because obviously what we've been doing to date and where we are at this point in time is 300 million tests every single month. That is a lot of tests, and sometimes you would think that no one is able to get a test and no one is being tested when nearly 12 million people are being tested every day. At the same time, as I have said, as the president has said, we want to do more, and we are continuing to do more. And that's why we're running this expedited process to procure more tests to ensure they're free, they're accessible, and they're available to people across the country.
And two
go ahead.
radio pool colleagues,
Okay.
if you will. The FAA ground stop earlier this week on the heels of the North Korean missile test. Can you give us an idea what information you all have about that? And is there a fear that these tests, North Korean tests, may actually pose some type of danger or issue for U.S. civil aviation?
I believe the FAA has spoken to this and taken kind of a look back at what happened. I think it was a 15-minute ground stop, and they have reflected on the procedures that happened and taken a look for them moving forward. I would note that our national security and, most importantly, our defense officials across the country, after those tests, conveyed that no officials were at risk. So I'd really point you to the FAA as they assess that decision last week, or earlier this week. Sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, a committee to protect journalists report questioning, saying freedom advocates are concerned with your administration in terms of access to the president for reporters, timely responses, the request.
Timely responses from our press office?
From the press office
I'm surprised to hear that.
to various queries on various topics.
Two queries, okay.
Slow responses to requests for information. Let me
Okay.
quote from that. The request to extradite Julian Assange, restrictions on access to the media at the southern border, limited help for Afghan journalists. Can you give us a comment from your perspective on how you see those things playing out and what some of these criticisms are?
Well, I haven't read the report, but I would say, broadly speaking, that when I spoke with the president about this job, I mean, one of the things he conveyed to me very clearly was resetting the tone with the media was a big priority for him, and ensuring that there was a respect, even when there's a point of contention or a difficult conversation or back and forth, that is part of democracy. But our objective has been to reinstill normalcy and engagement with reporters, whether we agree or disagree, whether there is a partisan tilt to an outlet or not. And I think we have conducted ourselves accordingly. And always we're working to continue to be responsive. I would say 2 inquiries of probably tens of thousands, if not more, does not to me sound like a data point, but I will look closer at the report. The other thing I would say is that the president has taken questions at about 250 occasions over the past year. If you average about 3 questions per time, that's about 750 questions he's taken. That does not include the formal press conference he did in March, other press conferences he's done. That's about 3, so let's say 1,000, just to be generous there. That's about 3 questions a day. I think the American people have seen him out there answering questions. He will continue to be. That's an important part of his engagement with the press and the public, and that will be a part of how we continue to conduct ourselves. Go ahead, James.
Thank you very much, Jen.
Thank you.
I want to ask one on the economy and one on the pandemic, if you don't mind.
Sure.
On the economy, in yesterday's briefing with Mr. Deese and in today's briefing, you have both cited economic metrics that showed great progress across 2021, from the unemployment rate to job creation to a rise in real household income. And when citing the progress in those areas, both you and Mr. Deese attributed that progress to specific administration policies and legislative initiatives. Yet when it came to the highest inflation in 40 years, both you and Mr. Deese attributed this to a variety of external factors, from the pandemic to supply chain constraints to inaction by the Congress on Build Back Better. So, to be clear, for the American people in this midterm year who are going to be assessing the performance of the president and his party, where specifically inflation is concerned, does the buck stop with the president?
Well, I would say, James, first, that the president has spoken to the fact that costs for Americans and the squeeze it puts on Americans is a top concern for him. And I think Brian Deese also conveyed that yesterday. And that's why he put in place a supply chain task force, why we've prioritized taking steps, including having a port czar, including ensuring there are more truckers on the roads, to ensure there are more goods moving and more goods on the shelves. And we've made a lot of progress in that regard. Of course, that's his responsibility and the responsibility of the economic team. I also think it's notable that if you go back to earlier this year, there were not the projections of the economic growth we have seen or the decrease in the unemployment rate we have seen. And that is in part not just according to us, but many outside economists, to the bills that have passed, some of them bipartisan, and the work of this administration to get the economy up and going again and address COVID.
So your answer is yes, he owns the job creation, he owns the low unemployment rate, and he also owns inflation, correct?
I think any president should own everything happening in the country, and the president certainly sees it that way.
Pandemic. The president's remarks this morning included yet another exhortation to the unvaccinated population to get vaccinated. He has, since assuming office, made dozens and dozens, perhaps hundreds, of these kinds of appeals to that particular population. Do you have any evidence? Indeed, do you have any sound basis for determining at all whether he is having any success in urging that population to do as he counsels?
We do. If you go back to December of 2020, just over 30%, maybe 35% of people in this country was open to getting vaccinated. Now we're at the point where more than 80% of the country has gotten at least one dose. What the president also recognizes is that he's not always the most effective messenger. Everybody in the country is not looking for him to tell them what to do. He certainly knows that. What's most important here is for people hearing from local leaders, pediatricians in some cases, doctors, people who have different political beliefs out there, conveying clear, accurate information about the effectiveness of these vaccines. We think all of that has had an impact, and a lot of that is stuff that we've implemented.
How do we know that 35% of the American population was willing to get vaccinated a year ago?
I can give you the data. I'm happy to give that to you after the briefing. It was a public poll. Go ahead.
Thank you, Jen. I have two questions, one on Haiti, the other one on Canada.
Sure.
The first one on Haiti. Yesterday was the 12th anniversary of the terrible earthquake of 2010. The effects are still being felt over there. How has the administration, or has the administration followed up on the migrants that were deported last fall, back the thousands of them that were deported over there?
Related to the earthquake?
Related to the earthquake, but considering the situation over there, 12 years later, what kind of follow-up has been done with the migrants that were sent back last fall?
Well, we have a very large presence on the ground, a diplomatic presence on the ground in Haiti, and that has continued to be the case. We are also one of the largest, if not the largest, provider of humanitarian assistance to Haiti through NGOs and many outside groups in order to provide assistance for the range of challenges that people in Haiti have gone through, from earthquakes or natural disasters to obviously the challenge of the assassination of their leader that happened this past summer. So we will continue to be providers of humanitarian assistance. Our diplomatic presence there is on the ground and working closely with trusted leaders in the region, in the country, and we remain committed to that.
You haven't been, the Americans on the ground, the officials on the ground, haven't been in contact with the Haitians who've been deported from Texas, for instance, last fall?
Well, I would say we have a diplomatic presence on the ground that's in touch with a range of Haitians who either have been sent back or who need help and assistance, and we work closely with local authorities to make sure that the humanitarian assistance is getting exactly to the people who need it.
Canada, Jen, I just want to check something with you. Considering the multiple recent trade setbacks with the U.S., the conservative leader in Canada this week claimed that the U.S.-Canada relationship is at its lowest point in decades. How do you see this?
We don't see it that way. We view Canada as an important neighbor, an important partner, a country we are aligned on in many democratic values. We work with on a range of issues facing the global community, and that is certainly the view of our government here.
You don't feel a frustration towards, for instance, the fact that the Buy America measures are still imposed actually more strictly under this administration?
We are certainly familiar with the frustrations of some leaders who have been outspoken about it and spoke to it when they were here. And I would just reiterate that our objective here is to make electric vehicles specifically more accessible to Americans, to lower the cost here for Americans, and that is why the president pushed so hard for those provisions. But we see continue to see Canada as an important partner in the world. Go ahead.
Just on the president's first anniversary in office, what does he regard as his single most important achievement? And does he acknowledge that any mistakes have been made? And if so, what's the biggest mistake?
Well, I would say first that the president is very proud of the progress we've made in getting 200 million Americans vaccinated, very proud of the work we have done to cut the childhood poverty by 40%, to help Americans who needed a little extra help get by through a challenging economic time, the work we did to get a bipartisan infrastructure bill passed, and to rebuild our place in the world. There are many others, I think, nominating and confirming historic judges across the board, ensuring that our administration up and down the ranks looks like America. And I could go on from there, fighting to take steps on climate in a historic manner that has been more than any administration in the past. In terms of what we look back, I'm not going to speculate on that from here. I will let the president speak to that the next time you all see him.
Did he underestimate Donald Trump's continued grip on the Republican Party and how difficult that would make it to work across the aisle and unite the nation?
I will tell you that hearing Kevin McCarthy talk today, for an example, and seeing what he said on January 21st last year is a pretty stark reminder of how much sway the former president has over members of his party. I think that's disappointing for everybody, not just people who work here. Go ahead.
Thank you, Jen. I wanted to ask a question from some colleagues who couldn't be here.
Sure.
And then before I get to that, I wanted to follow up on a question that Justin asked.
Sure.
The president was in the Senate for 36 years.
Yeah.
We're at a point where his legislative agenda on Build Back Better and Voting Rights Act has hit major roadblocks. Is there some introspection that his approach to the Senate is not working, and are there changes that he's making to his approach to the Senate, given his experience there?
Well, I would also point to his experience leading him to stay focused and committed to the bipartisan infrastructure bill, something that many said could never happen. And when it was voted on, 19 Republicans voted for it. He leaned on his experience in the Senate to get that done. He leaned on his experience in the Senate to get the American Rescue Plan done and passed into law. And he will continue to lean on his experience in the Senate and as a former vice president to press for voting rights legislation, to press for Build Back Better, and getting those pieces of legislation done. So I would say, the successes we had in the past year and that he had, despite the fact that there was a slim margin, are actually, I guess I'm biased, but pretty impressive given the margin we had in the Senate and the challenges we had up against us.
Given that he's ending his first year underwater in the polls, more Americans disapprove of his job in office than approve of his job in office. What is he planning to do differently in his approach to the job in the second year that shows that he's listening to that disapproval?
Well, I think what you see in most of these polls is a real frustration and exhaustion with COVID and the fact that it is not over. We share that. We understand that. People are fatigued across the country. It's impacting how they live, how they work. Their worries about their kids, their ability to experience joyful things in life like concerts and going to restaurants and seeing friends. We understand that. The president knows that the most important step he can take is to continue to fight to get the pandemic under control and also to lower costs for Americans across the country. So I would say it's a continuation of the fights that he built a great deal of a base for over the course of the last year.
The president doesn't think that the disapproval rates are a reflection of the way he's approached the job.
Again, I would point you to what most data shows you, which is a frustration about COVID and prices, and he believes, and he's believed from the beginning, that addressing COVID and the economy are number 1, 2, 3, 4 issues, and that continues to be the case today.
Just a couple questions from colleagues who couldn't be here. Do Biden and Putin have plans to meet in the future?
I don't have anything to predict for you on that front. As Jake mentioned, we're just, of course, concluding the third round of talks. People are going to go back to their capitals. They're going to discuss and assess and see where things stand. So in terms of next steps, we'll have to see. We'll know more over the coming days.
In those talks, is there a deadline for Moscow to de-escalate in Ukraine?
Again, I'm not going to set any deadlines here. Ultimately, the choice is really up to them. Are they going to proceed in invading Ukraine? If so, there are going to be severe consequences and economic impacts that will be devastating to the economy. They're far beyond what happened in 2014. If that's a choice they want to make and they think that's to their advantage, that's a choice. They only have the power to make that.
Very good.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.